everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm here today with my special guest, Christopher Balzano, who is the author of this particular book. I put this particular picture up here, the Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, because it happens to be the one that's in my personal library. He's got a bunch of other books out, and I'm sure I will buy some of those too. He seems to be going by geographic area. So I met Christopher in Fort Myers, Florida, and there's definitely a ghosts or legends or something of Southwest Florida is one of the books. And so that's probably one of the first ones I would get, since that's where I heard some stories about Fort Myers. So welcome, Christopher. And you want to let us hear anything about you you'd like to share?
No, I think that's really got it. Actually, if I was in nowhere land, right, like not in Florida, the first one I would go for, which, hopefully it kind of fits in with some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. But it's a book that I wrote called Haunted Objects, Stories of Ghosts on Your Shelf, which is a much wider, broader kind of scope of the paranormal. In addition to, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Bridgewater Triangle in southeastern Massachusetts, but I've got some books about that as well as Florida. So
yeah, I spent a whole day in the Bridgewater Triangle last summer.
Oh, you did?
We drove around to almost anything we could find. We did not see the random hitchhiker. We did not hear any weird sounds. We hiked to the cliff where sometimes there's like fires on top, and I forget the name of the lake. But there's I could look it up later. But
Lake Nickapucka, yeah, I got that one.
Well, this one is we hiked back into the woods, and then there's a lake. It's kind of a small lake, and across it is this rather like a 50 or 60 foot tall cliff, and then on top of it.
Are you talking about the Sonnet Ledge?
Yeah, I think that one. Yeah, we went there.
I know the Sonnet Ledge. The first book that I ever published, not the first book I wrote, but the first one I published, was actually an entire book just about the Freetown State Forest, which that is in. So I'm kind of I've spent a lot of time at the Sonnet Ledge. Probably, fortunately or unfortunately, one of the things that I'm most famous for is Pukwudgies, which kind of again fit into what we're going to be talking about tonight, and the video that we shot there called "When Pukwudgies Attack."
That's
so
cool.
if you see that video,
okay.
Well, if you have this book, if you have the Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, it's on the DVD.
Okay.
The clip of it that became that, which all takes place at the Sonnet Ledge. That's got to be probably, if you're talking about one single spot, probably the most haunted place that I've ever been to. So it's exciting that you were there.
Yeah, my husband and I have sought out. We've stayed at haunted hotels. We've been at the Clown Motel in Tonopah and the Mizpah Hotel in Tonopah. We've gone to the Bigfoot, what is it called? The Sasquatch Outpost of Bailey, Colorado. We've been by Area 51. We've because I want to see the Nevada Triangle. We've been to Point Pleasant. We went by the Pope Lick Trestle to try to see the Pope Lick monster. We may later in the fall go to Ohio and try to find the Loveland frogmen.
It's funny you're literally mentioning all of the things that are all around my house here behind me. So
yep.
Except for the Fresno night crawlers you didn't mention, but
my favorites. That's one reason you can't tell I'm wearing this shirt, because I thought, what should I wear? And this is a shirt with all kinds of. I
can't see the shirt.
Yeah, I know. See, it's got cryptids all over it.
Oh, okay, very very cool. Is there a Pukwudgie on there?
There's no Pukwudgie, but it's got the Fresno night crawlers, and
cool.
Those are my absolute favorite. I would love to see a Fresno night crawler. That would be like the pinnacle of my life if I could see one of those.
Like I said when in the introduction to my tour that we first met on, probably about 10 years. I spent a long time. I literally, as you can see, have a book where I helped to train other paranormal investigators. And about 10 years ago, I put all that away because belief is an interesting thing, and there's a reason why things like the Baba Yaga still exist, right? Like why we still tell those stories. There's a reason why I'm a high school English teacher, and we do a section on urban legends, and 95% of the students pick something spooky, right? And there's a reason why La Llorona, like every single class, there's some kids who won't even say the name. You know what I'm saying? They won't even say the word. And so, we need our legends. And, with the whole idea, I don't investigate. I do something called legend tripping. And the ultimate kind of thesis of legend tripping is experience over evidence. And so it's being in the moment and seeing why a specific community thinks that this place is haunted, and what they do to trigger that. And along with that, the other kind of part of that is it's almost irrelevant whether or not it's real. Because, and I'm not talking in terms of like the level of thought forms or tulpas or anything like that. I'm talking about just the idea that these stories and these ideas and these figures exist in the heads of the community, therefore they exist.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we want to get to tonight. You see, I put Slenderman here on the thing because that's one of my current interests, I guess, is that Slenderman is a modern thing, right? We know that this guy named Eric invented it, and I wrote it down here, 2009. It was like for a contest or something, but it was an online thing. We know this guy did it. We know when he did it, and yet Slenderman has like taken off, right? He's told these girls to commit murder. There was a like a Slenderman defense a few years ago in a murder trial. We see movies on it. It's gotten very popular, and it hits all the right things, right? It's creepy. It's dark. It wears a suit, which seems to clash with the whole paranormal thing, and it doesn't have a face. And faceless things are really
a little bit of clashes.
But yeah, I mean, we had a cat who loved people, and he loved Halloween because people came up to the door, right? And he was just thrilled. It didn't matter what kind of face it was. It could be Spider-Man. It could be an alien face. He didn't care. But if somebody came up with a blank face mask, the cat would freak out. So faces are important, right? And something that doesn't have a face, it unsettles us, right? So Slenderman, in the current sense we're talking about it, is only, 16, 17 years old. But in terms of creepy things that we're labeling with a name at night, well, that's as ancient as people, right? So kind of use Slenderman as a way in to talk about night, dark. Why are humans labeling things? What are we labeling? Why do we feel the need to label it? What is it? What's out there in the dark? And I'm sure you have some ideas.
I do. Slenderman is a huge reason why I'm still doing what I do. Mm-hmm. So probably about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, kind of at the height of my popularity in the paranormal world, like I was brought in, I was doing a pilot for something and all this kind of good stuff. And I just got so aggravated. I tore the website that I had down, which was Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads, tore that down, deleted all of the episodes of everything I had ever done, all this kind of like very dramatic stuff. But it was Slenderman that brought me back. Because being at that time a middle school teacher, so I wasn't a high school teacher, I was a middle school teacher, I was listening to an interview with Lauren Coleman, the famed cryptozoologist, who is also, he worked in the social services system for years. And so a lot of his writing has to do with, connecting these things. And, he's got probably his best book is not a paranormal book. It's this one called The Copycat Effect, like these kind of sociological ideas. And I was listening to this interview with him, and he said something really odd to me, which was Slenderman as a phenomenon impacts most greatly girls between the ages of 9 and 11, right? And it was so ridiculously narrow. And I thought, okay, so keep in mind, I'm not talking about are freaked out by Slenderman or freaked out by that idea, because that extends well beyond that realm. But psychologically being able to get in, and the two girls from Wisconsin that you mentioned fell into that era, fell into that group. And it also happened to be around the same time, which doesn't get nearly as much publicity, but there was a figure in Chinese anime who was very much like, I'm not going to say anime, but Chinese animation, very much like Slenderman, who caused an entire flap of female suicides and violence in China that leaked out at almost the exact same time. as the Wisconsin incident. And I became obsessed with this idea, kind of dealing with that age group. Why that age group? Like, what is it about that whole whole mindset of kids in that age? And so that's what really brought me back into the paranormal, was my research into trying to figure out why this urban legend, or why this, reflection of something really paranormal and supernatural out there, would inspire and spark and influence this particular age group and this particular sex. And in doing that, I discovered that Slenderman was not new at all. I mean, in the years leading up to Victor's publishing of those pictures, there had been several different Slenderman precursors, right? Like, you had probably most famously, I should have worn the shirt tonight, but I don't have you had the gentleman from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Love that episode, Hush. Yeah.
Right? You had Dark Cities, which was Dark City, which was those are identical to, more facial features, because you were mentioning the faces, but like that has it. And then I started looking back, and one of you and I off air were talking about there was an episode of, I think it was Amazing Stories. I don't think it was the Twilight. It was a Twilight Zone from the 80s, and it was the Shadow Man. And it was essentially the story of Slenderman. And the whole point of that story was, there's a nerd, he's picked on by everybody, no self-confidence, and this dark this shadow person comes out from under the bed and says, I am the Shadow Man. I will never harm the person under whose bed I sleep, or I think it's live. And so, he then, the whole story goes on, and he, he starts doing things, and other kids are, and then at the end, spoilers, I mean, it's like, a 40-year-old show. At the end, he gets killed by one, and right as he's being killed, it's not the same one that's under his bed. It's a different one. Right? Of course, that Twilight Zone twist. But the whole point of that, which is kind of what, a really good entry into this, because I found this theme in a whole bunch of sociological books and a whole bunch of anthropology books, was this idea of that moment where kids rule and where the parents fall away. And then to some degree, kids develop their own society, right? And so in this episode, there's only like 4 lines in an hour that are said by adults. And the rest of it are all these kids in these different situations. They're at the diner together. You never see a waiter. They're going out and to the parks by themselves and all this stuff, which is kind of a bigger version of when you go to sleep at night and you shut off that light, especially as a child, and mom and dad aren't there, and the family structure is not there, and your protection is not there. And that's when we start to see those shadows. And so what I discovered in doing all of that research was this idea that Slenderman as a story. Now, I fully believe there's a Slenderman out there. Not necessarily the way that he's depicted or that these stories are true, and definitely not that those girls were inspired. He didn't tell them to kill. They just thought that if they did this, they would win his favor, which was the same thing that was going on in China. What I discovered was this kind of isolation and this breaking off point and the influence of pop culture at that moment to dramatically impact what we love and what we hate, and more importantly, what we fear.
Interesting. So that's like it sort of combines the crucial age of starting to separate from your parents.
Yeah. And it was really interesting because when you break down so many of the elements of ghost stories, and I'm gonna use the term urban legend, but it's not really an urban legend, right? Like, it's more modern folklore than urban legend, but I'm going to use the term urban legend because I like it more. If you line up the stories, especially when it comes to like TikTok, when it comes to Instagram, when it comes to analog horror, all of those things that are really dramatically drawing our tweens are paralleled to um, the the old fairy tales, right? But what it is that like women today are asked to be women a lot sooner. So most of those, obviously, you have the ones that are really young, a Little Red Riding Hood, and you have, you have like the ones that are really really young, but a lot of those have to do with women who are between the ages of like 15 to 20 that fall into those fairy tale realms, like Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella and all those people. Well, the 16-year-old of old days is the 11-year-old of today. And so those kind of, both sexual roles and also all that other stuff, it's being fulfilled in the same way by these younger women, these younger girls who are being asked. And therefore, all of these digital legends are hitting the same spots that they used to for older girls.
Okay, so we find these things are hitting the spots, right? And I think, I've read a lot of stuff on like the Grimm's tales with the Little Red Riding Hood, especially being stories about coping with puberty and that your changing role in society, right? Going from child to adult. So we're labeling things that hit people at that age, though it doesn't mean there's not something out there needing a label, right? But is it just psychological, or is there something in the dark that needs a label and it just has to be Slenderman right now? Maybe 10 years from something else.
I think elemental forces like Slenderman exist out there. I think the Slenderman story and a lot of these digital legends, a lot of these creepypasta born stories are not necessarily like reflecting things that really exist as much as those are filling out the emotional need. But I can tell you 100% from my research that there are things in the dark from both my experiences and my research. Years before Slenderman, my very first teaching job, I taught at a juvenile detention facility. And this was a step down program, right? So it was like they had served their time in what they called secure lockup. And then this was like almost like they needed to get social skills and go through a program before they could go back into society, right? So I had kids between the ages of 13 to the day before they were 21. That was my school. And speaking of the Bridgewater Triangle, a lot of those kids went through Taunton State Hospital. It wasn't even then, but what was originally Taunton State Hospital, which is an insane asylum inside the Bridgewater Triangle. Probably most famously known for Lizzie Borden was there before her trial. That's where she waited before her trial. And so this was not a mental health facility at that time. Massachusetts, the original green state, right? They recycled all their buildings. And so this had been what was used to be, a mental health facility that had went through all the experimental things you can think of, deep freezes and electric shock therapy and drug and therapeutic, but there was a lot. It's one of the most haunted buildings in Massachusetts. Now, my kids, who are messed up in the head anyway, right? They were juvenile criminals, were staying in what used to be those rooms as a secure lockup. I taught there for about 6 years. And over the course of 6 years, because it's a program, kids fail out of the program, kids graduate from the program, kids, run because it wasn't a secure facility. I saw hundreds of kids, and I saw dozens of kids who had spent time in Taunton State, who didn't know each other. That's the important thing. And the number of those kids blew me away, who reported seeing shadow people watching them as they slept. And what they would say, most of them said Venom would come into my room at night, because that was their frame of reference, right? Spider-Man's Venom. And they said it would be lifted up in the air, always in the corner of the room, always on the left side of the room from where they were facing. elevated just watching them sleep.
Hmm.
And much like in Dark City, they would then kind of rotate and float out and float through the door that these kids wish they could get out of, and disappear. And this was at least 20, 30 kids who told me in depth these stories. And these were not, some of them were recovering drug addicts, but whether it was reliable or not reliable, it's the same story being told by, at least 24 kids who were the toughest kids you can ever imagine, right? These were kids who had seen a lot and done a lot, and they would start to shake as they told the stories. So the idea of like a shadow person who's coming into teenagers' rooms is not a new idea. And it's also not just a media created one, because I've had people who have experienced it. And that's just one group of people. That's not the countless number of people who I've interviewed. Like I said on the tour, I've interviewed a lot of people who have seen shadow people in their lives. And it's not just because society needs to fill a need. No, something is flipping watching them in these haunted locations.
And that's pretty awful. I mean, right, they're being watched in the dark, and we're primates. We depend on our vision, so we're at a loss, right? In the dark, something else that sees better than us it's got quite an advantage over you.
And I think one of the things is it's even worse when it's not in the dark, because if you are living in a haunted house and you hear, my sister used to live in one, and I would babysit for my nieces, and I would always hear from upstairs a very masculine coughing. And then what sounded like books being knocked over, right? I would hear it all the time. And it was like, all right, but I'm here and it's up there, and that's fine. And even though other people I never saw anything in the house, right? Shadow people you see. And the fact that there's some kind of, it's almost worse. It's like, do you want to be sleeping, if you're scared of the dark, do you want to be sleeping in complete darkness? Or do you want a light on in the next room where you could possibly see something crossing through the light? So which is scarier, seeing it or not seeing it? And I think one of the odd things about shadow people in terms of all the other paranormal things is the frequency with which they're seen and the fact that they are actually seen. They are not sometimes felt, right? They've got that traditional kind of cold feeling when they're nearby. But I very rarely get people reporting cold feelings. It's a visual thing. It's a thickness that they can't explain. And it's that part of it that kind of weirds them out and frightens them the most.
That's an interesting point.
And also, kind of like I was saying on the tour, they're harbingers that there's other stuff going on. So they're kind of like that confirmation of like, am I alone in the dark? Did I hear that? Like, did I see that thing going by? And then there's a shadow person. So it's almost like this kind of like stamp that you are certifiably haunted right now, or sort of certified haunted, not certifiably haunted.
That's an interesting point about light and dark. Because I remember reading a review of Midsummer, the movie that came out like 5 or 6 years ago. It takes place in Sweden in the summer, and they said, unlike a normally horror movies take place in the dark, this is this Scandinavian summer where the sun never goes down, right? So it's unrelentingly sunny and bright, and yet all these horrific things are happening. And did that make them more scary?
Right.
So yeah, if you can see it, is it scarier? It's an interesting idea. One thing I've seen about shadow people in particular is some people think they're like interdimensional, and that like they're shadowy because the light from their dimension they're backlit, basically. So
yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that particular, because that kind of now you're introducing ultimate other dimensions, into this.
Yeah.
But
I think that there is this question mark, and so I think anyone who investigates the paranormal, who looks into the paranormal, eventually gets to the idea of shadow people, right? Like you have to acknowledge that they're there, and I think the idea is that most people have their own set of beliefs about the paranormal in general. And so shadow people become a, no pun intended, reflection of whatever their idea is. So if they think that the paranormal in general is an interdimensional thing, then all of a sudden there's that. If they think if it's religion, then it's a demon. If they think that it's a it's a if they're very science based or the pseudoscience based, then they think it has something to do with frequencies and things like that. And I think that's one of probably the most unsettling thing about these kinds of things is that we don't know, right? Like even within in a field where you don't know so much, the fact that you can't easily label or have your label argued with by somebody makes them even kind of more unsettling.
I like just about being a reflection, because I'd read at least in one of the books I was reading that in the Victorian era, the shadow people had tendency to have female silhouettes, and now they seem to be male. So whatever they are, it's like when you see it, you're also you have some kind of a bias of what's maybe scarier or whatever, and then that's how it appears to you, right?
So you're seeing it through your frame or your goggles.
Which doesn't mean there's nothing there, but I mean, I've had students, we talked about like transhumanism and stuff sometimes in classes, like, I don't want to be a brain in a box or whatever. It's like, you are a brain in a box, honey. I mean, we call it the skull, but your brain doesn't have any access to the outside world. It relies on, electrochemical impulses from your, over nerves, and then it has to construct this sort of Oculus Rift world that we all live in. What you're seeing is what your brain constructs. It's not what's really there. So, you're all brain in a box. So, if your bias is a guy in a fedora would be scarier, maybe than a woman. Maybe that's why you see a guy in a fedora shadow. I don't know. But then what's behind the shadow? Is it just you inventing something, or is it something that we that's there, but now your brain has decided, I'm going to put a shadow person there because that's as close as I can get. Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of things, as someone who considers himself a folklorist, much more than an investigator now. There are some things that I can easily say are kind of inventions that we need, or things that have a real, there's a ton in Florida, probably because of the heat, places where you can go and watch, the giant orbs dance with each other and have fun and do all this kind of stuff. And, there are some places in Florida where that was like the hottest date in town. You didn't bring her to the movies. You brought her to go see the Oviedo lights near Orlando, Florida, right? I don't think shadow people are that. I think shadow people are a genuine thing that exists and not a construct. Whereas I can say a lot of things in the paranormal, I can be like, we need this. It serves a function. Shadow people don't serve a function. Right? Like they are not, and I like the idea of what you were saying earlier. And I know shadow people are different than Slenderman, but like the fact that a shadow person doesn't have a face and doesn't have a body, so we can project anything we want on it, that makes it set up to be some kind of archetypal thing. Yet so many people who do not believe in the paranormal or in same situations or like in the same very similar kind of, environments, like in terms of like paranormal, supernatural activity are reporting them, makes me feel that it's more than just a coping mechanism or a reflection of what we believe about the world, that these things are genuinely walking around, observing, taking things in, like,
Yeah, then what? I mean, why? Are we that interesting, or is it just there?
I know the fact that we don't know that's like the thing, right? Of course, and we've talked about the one of the theories that a lot of people have is that they're feeding off of the activity, that somehow, I don't know if you want to call it a paranormal exchange releases or gives you access to some kind of soul energy, which is different than the other forms of energy that we can easily harness, and that these things somehow live off that, like that's their food. That then opens up a whole nother can of worms about what they are, right? Like, it's really, I mean, once again, all I can say is what they do, why they're doing it is really difficult because you can put anything on. Oh, they're us 100 years from now coming back, observing what we're scared of because they're writing a doctor thesis. Like, anything that you believe in the paranormal world, the supernatural world, can fit into the explanation, but ultimately it's a big old question mark, which makes it more endearing.
Yeah.
Or enduring. Enduring, not endearing. If you love yourself a shadow person, that's your own issue.
Yeah. I mean, I currently have a play being considered by a local group on whether they might stage it or not. And the aliens that abduct people, it's like basically their high school project,
Yeah.
So yeah, who knows? Is it just for school, or is it something they all do? Is it maybe they have different occupations and watching humans just happens to be their version of the anthropologist? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably the only person in the world who's a ridiculously huge fan of the TV show Fringe. And that whole idea was that, like, I don't think they ever really got into why these observers were coming back to document these, weird occurrences that were going on, but they were there, and once again, they looked very much like the anti-Slenderman, right? Because they were wearing gray suits and kind of like showed up and had bald head. But however much I've thought about this, I've never really been able to come up with a really good reason as to the why. Why they would be doing this. And that's one of the things that really kind of is most upsetting about them, is this idea of like, well, why are they there? Isn't it bad enough I've got other ghosts in my house or weird things are going on? Like, why do I also have to have this?
Yeah. I think we want to be able to figure out what's going on, right? Because that's also a drive, right? What is happening? What is this? You see this in movies. I've noticed this between like Japanese and American horror films, right? The Japanese, very fatalistic, right? The evil notices you. There's no reason. There's no rhyme to it. You're just like in the wrong place at the wrong time, and there's no escape from it. You're just gonna die. But then you see the American version of the same story. The Ring is obviously one of them, where the main character is a reporter. Now she's going to like get to the bottom of it, right? She does research and she's going to figure out what's happening, so she can figure out the whole mystery. And the Japanese movies don't worry too much about that, right?
Yeah.
But on the American side, it's like we want to put that puzzle together, right?
Yeah, we gotta have that narrative. We gotta have that, Aristotle plot diagram that shows the progress through it, that we ultimately have a solution, because that's how stories make sense to us, because it's conflict. Conflict not resolved is just conflict. And we don't escape through cinema or through novels or through cartoons or even like quick little TikTok videos. We don't like the conflict to still be out there, although nowadays 100%, what I'm saying. And I think that's why there are so many independent movies and independent YouTube creators and TikTok and Instagram creators who create these great analog horrors where there is no solution, where there is that kind of up in the air question mark. Whereas my generation is still of the like, no, what happened at the end of Sopranos, right? Like, my daughter wouldn't care at all what happened at the end of Sopranos. It's like the fact that it's left open like that is what they expect, probably because for the first time, they really have no map as to what the heck is going to happen in this world. Like, they have people like me who have who have pessimism, and is like the first generation that's not doing as well as their parents, and whose parents didn't set as strict of a like, here's the way the world works. So that stuff is all reflected in our horror, and also, in our paranormal.
Yeah, I like that you bring that up, because sometimes, I mean, although I do like those horror stories too, sometimes I'm just like at the end of a horror movie, I'm like, well, couldn't we just have had a resolution in one horror movie? Because it seems like they're all open-ended now. So the evil's always still there. Nothing ever gets resolved. It's like, couldn't I just have like one movie where there's a resolution? Just one,
Well, it's funny. It was like, I saw Sinners. Have you seen Sinners?
Not yet.
Sinners, the first hour and a half of Sinners is some of the best filmmaking I've seen. And I was like, this is so inventive, and this is so not where I thought this was going. And I was, and the setup of it was unlike really anything that I had experienced, and I've seen a lot. But then I felt the need to resolve the story, and I was like, "Oh my word, you don't need to resolve this, please don't." And in doing that, you have to fall back on like classic ways to resolve a story, and so it became this very inventive and creative thing that then had to fall back on like the old standards, at the end of it. So the first hour and 15 minutes are so powerful, and then I think it loses something, right? And so I understand the idea. I want every single horror movie, by law to have to end on like, dun dun dun, or is it? Like that's perfectly fine. But I also like it when like there's no answer, there's no solution. And that's, like I said, becoming more and more popular with the younger generations.
Well, both can work, yeah. But I guess, that's an interesting idea that where there are horror movies are a reflection of like a modern zeitgeist, right? Like where are we going and what's the future going to look like? And we're all doomed, right? So do we dredge Godzilla up out of like nuclear destruction?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the interesting thing is that the mindset, like things have changed, but the mindset is very much in tune with urban legends and creepy folklore from the 1950s and 60s, right? So like that whole like thing at the end where the hook is attached to the handle still, right? Or you flick the light on and it says, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" Those things hint at like the really scary stuff that's out there that you almost touched. And I think that what we've done now is just cut off where those legends cut off, and not kind of like brought it to the next logical thing is, and then they catch him the next day because the detective comes in and and I think that there's something attractive about that. And by the way, all of those were female stories that were taking place with females who were in college. And even that part has shifted, which is why Slenderman's so popular. Like those were the fairy tales of the 50s and 60s. So
we still have that need to tell these stories, right? They just change a little bit because of time and circumstance, I guess, and culture. So you aren't necessarily running from a wolf in the woods anymore. Right, because where are the woods and who's seen a wolf in real life? But
right, like,
but now there's something else that's chasing you down the street in your subdivision or something.
It came up on my Facebook feed, and I'm going to try to get it right because it was the most brilliant thing I've ever said in my life, and I'm going to try to get it right because I very rarely say brilliant things. But what I said was something to the effect of like, we don't have Paul Bunyan, we have Ted Bundy, and we don't have. What's his name? John Henry. We have Henry Lee Lucas. This idea that so much of our mindset is in the true crime area, where there is evil and then it's punished and then there's like a question mark potentially with a lot of it, or the stories that draw us the most are the ones that my students think that. Not only that, Jeffrey Dahmer. They not only think Jeffrey Dahmer kidnapped Adam Walsh and ate Adam Walsh, but they also feel that he wasn't really killed in prison and he was allowed to escape, or he escaped and then they said that he was killed in prison because they didn't want to admit that he had gotten loose. So the weird thing is that I've seen these folk heroes of true crime take on this like majestic life in my students' minds, and they carry on the conversation. So they're so much more interested in the Zodiac, who's never been caught, and Jack the Ripper. And it's like, okay, that's crazy. I can't get you to read Victorian novels, but you'll read about Jack the Ripper. So excellent. We're doing a whole section on Spring Heel Jack. Just because that question mark, I think, is much more appealing to them because their life is a question mark.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Slenderman, then going back to that, is like one of the maybe modern labels we're putting on this need or whatever, maybe shadow people who now saying to have male silhouettes, and my previous had female silhouettes. Are there any others that kind of come up recently that were like, so I don't know how old like flesh gates and rakes really are, but are we populating a whole new like ecosystem in the past 25 or 30 years?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because then you had Slenderman with a hat, like you were talking about the fedora earlier. Like that was a new variation of it. And now I think it has a lot to do. Probably the biggest one that I've seen is, and once again, this is the influence of Japan and Korean culture. A lot more of the creepy crawly women with long hair. Teka Teka and like even like Momo Challenge and things like that. That female distorted, looking like she's come out of the grave, sometimes very young looking. I think that's actually taken over Slenderman so much more over the last like 10 years.
So like in the rain, your Samara is like a kind of Yuri. She's
yeah. I think most of my students are kind of over Slenderman, right? Like they know it and they can talk about it and it freaks them out a little bit. But you start talking about Momo and don't even finish the end, or you start talking about Teki Teki, it's like, no, don't do it. Or you take, Bloody Mary and you put her in the bathroom of a public school, which is another Korean urban legend. And you better not say, is she wearing blue or red? And so I think these kind of like female characters have actually taken over Slenderman. And they've broken through maybe the glass ceiling of urban legends, and those are now the predominant ones, because a female teenager is more likely to consume horror social media than a male is, but then also I think that it's like there's something reflective in the same way that Slenderman was reflective of male in the corner of the room, creepy weirdness. This idea that like a reflection of you is creeping across the floor. It's you much more than it is like a man. So I would definitely say those are the huge, scary legends that, and here's the important part, that people think are true. The other part of that I would probably say is the whole concept and like the taking over of so many haunted locations with Black-Eyed Kids. And I'm not sure if you've done an episode on Black-Eyed Kids or not, but like
not yet.
Those are well, cut. We'll now do the Black-Eyed Kids episode. But Black-Eyed Kids are kind of like probably the most dominant story being told. And so if you take a haunting in Florida, for example, where they shot the movie Jeepers Creepers, has for decades been a haunted location, right? It's right near a school. People have seen ghostly kids crossing that street for years. Now they're Black-Eyed Kids. And now one group of Black-Eyed Kids distracts you or makes you stop while the other ones start to tap on your window and ask for a ride.
I think the turning something that's supposed to be innocent into something dangerous is another one of those things that really hits the sweet spot. Even Near Dark, which is one of the best vampire movies ever.
Yeah.
The little kid vampire, he gets people by like putting his bicycle down and then lying on the sidewalk so that people see a child who apparently has been in a bicycle accident. They come close enough and then he gets them. So yeah, this thing that something that should be kind of like harmless or it's going to turn on you is definitely another one of those things that people
and the idea that there is something dark and big and nefarious behind it. We've done a whole 180 on the importance of religion in horror movies, right? In terms of, so we were talking about Pukwudgies earlier, and some of my early writing on Pukwudgies, because I was very much into, I had by me at all times the Field Guide of Demons. And there's an entire section of that that talks about demons of the woods, and it uses the word demons, and it's a very broad definition of what demons is, probably what like we would call elementals in concept, right? And I've been attacked, especially recently, so much for calling them demons, because it's like, how dare you Christianize these things? And I'm like, okay, literally, here's a book that's this thick of every culture in the world that calls these things demons, right? And so it's not that it's not necessarily the idea of like everything's scarier if it's the devil, but like that idea of some kind of unified dark force against you. And the Black-Eyed Kids hint at that. Now, if you want to talk sociologically, like, do we trust our government anymore? Do we think like these are kids who walk around and say, you know, Illuminati confirmed to each other? Yeah, like, so the idea of some kind of, you know, it's not this thing is out to get you, but this thing is a gateway to a much bigger thing that's already got you and just wants to, like, you know, claim what it needs. That's a really scary idea.
And it likes to play with its food.
I like the way you said that, and I think that's everybody, right? Like, if you could say the word demon on your TV show, it's you know, a bigger hit, you know. And with these kids, it's always like, is it the devil? You know, like. So I think that's the thing that's driving, and really kind of kicked Slenderman's butt and is now taken over.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate you taking your time to come on my channel today, and I hope you'll be willing to do it again sometime.
Anytime you'd like.
I could talk about this forever, and I have a feeling that you could also talk about it for quite a while. It is just something that's always fascinated me from the time I learned how to read and look at TV shows. I was like, that's what I wanted to read, was all these unexplainable things and the are they real kind of things. And I still call them the Kelly gargoyles, because I know they're like the Hopkins Hill goblins now, it seems like, but I can't even find the original source where I learned to call them the Kelly gargoyles, right? Because it seems like that no one calls them gargoyles anymore for that particular UFO incident. But you know, my whole life, it's like, what can I find that's unexplained that I can read? So I hope you will come back. I love talking with you tonight.
I will.
I remember everybody who's watching, I hope you made it to the end and you like this. Certainly leave us some comments. You can even leave us negative comments if you want. The algorithm doesn't really care. But otherwise, hit like and subscribe.
Just don't tell me if you put negative comments.
And, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.